Greetings, adventurers, and welcome to Skill Tree, where we learn how to do just about everything. So we've done a lot by way of like armor and weapons on this channel, but we've been severely lacking in one particular department so far. That one item of kit that makes a foot soldier look incredibly formidable, a line of soldiers look nigh impregnable, and just kinda cuts that heroic form we're looking for. That's right, today we make a mighty shield, for no warrior is complete without it. Oh, it's salt. It's salt. I really have to start labeling these. Okay, I'm gonna level with you. Over the holiday, I went ahead and bought myself a little present. Specifically, this set of wood carving chisels. And though, yeah, a shield is a really cool, badass looking piece of tech, I really just kind of wanted an excuse to be able to use my chisels. And a shield just happens to be a big old slab of wood just begging to have a design carved into it. So that's today's episode. Today, we're gonna learn how to use those wood carvers, because I've never done it before, on a big old Viking-inspired shield. So without much further ado, let's jump right into it and level up this skill. So a lot of people who end up making their own shield like this do it out of a birch plywood, I've read, which honestly is a really good idea. It's easy to find, easy to work with, thin, relatively lightweight. But the problem with plywood is it's plywood, right? Like it's got a whole bunch of different plies of wood that are laminated together with the grains going in different directions. Not really conducive at all to being able to carve a shape out of it. So for my shield, I ended up just buying these pre-glued together slabs of pine from Home Depot. I got the two of them with the intent to glue the edges together to make my working slab. Sure, I could have gotten a whole bunch of planks and glued them together, but I was lazy. This is most of the way done. I just have to do one glue up. Though after clamping them together and letting them dry, I did realize that I was kind of a moron and didn't wipe the glue on the underside of it away. Basically, I glued it to my table. You know, like a dipshit. It was a minor problem. I was eventually able to get it up with minimal damage done to my table. And after some sanding where that seam was, you couldn't even tell. So I'm gonna call it a win. I'm fine, everything's fine. Okay, so to lay this thing out, the first thing I had to do was figure out where my center was. To do that, I just positioned my metal straight edge here diagonally from one corner to the other, making a line roughly in the center. I then repeated that using the other two corners, which gives me a nice X in the middle, marking right where my center spot is. Now that I know where that center is, the thought is to use some sort of a compass to transcribe a perfect circle. Now looking at traditional shield sizes, and I'm going off of like historical context, but none of this is gonna be accurate, anachronistic at best. But yeah, looking at historical shield sizes, it looks like they ranged anywhere from 28 inches around all the way to 36. So for my shield, I decided about 30 inches would be plenty. To make that circle the exact size I need it, I took this piece of aluminum and drilled a hole in one end. Then I drilled another hole 15 inches away on the opposite end. I just positioned that first hole directly over that center mark that I made, and then locked it into place with a screw. And then positioned a pencil through the other hole so that I can draw my perfect 30-inch circle. Now at this point, I decided I actually wanted there to be an inch of a border all the way around the shield. And again, I wanted to make that perfect. So to make that happen, I just drilled another hole 1 inch away from the last hole on that aluminum piece. Then I put it back into position with the screw and just used the same trick to draw that inner circle 1 inch smaller. With that all drawn in, I busted out ye olde jigsaw to free up my shape from the slab. And look, I know this isn't the purpose of this video, but let me just take a second to be really proud that I was able to do this all in one cut. Like, look at how perfect that little circle is. It's stupid, but I'm proud of it. Anyways, with that, I have the 30-inch disc that is going to be my shield. Okay, so for my design, I decided to rep the tree here and draw our skill tree logo. I just kind of freehanded it since it's mostly just straight lines and it wasn't too hard to draw. But I also wanted to add these little emblems for Maddie and myself, as I thought it would be kind of a cool touch. So to get those into place, I grabbed some of this carbon paper that I had lying around. This stuff is phenomenal. Simply by tracing over the carbon paper, the carbon gets imparted onto the wood, leaving me with an exact copy of my lines. I don't know why I don't use this stuff more often, because it really does make my life a lot easier. Cool, so now that we have our whole design laid out, we can get to the business at hand and learn how to carve. Again, full disclosure, I've actually never used hand chisels to like carve a design before. This is my first time ever doing it. So if you're experienced, don't judge me too harshly. As I said, I ended up picking up this nice little set from Amazon. It got really good reviews, so I figured I'd go with it. Now while researching, I learned that the chisels actually have 2 numbers on them. The first number, in this case a 7, indicates the sweep of the chisel, which is basically how extreme the arc here on the end is. The other number says how wide the chisel is. So this chisel has a sweep of 7 and is 14 millimeters wide, compared to this one which has a sweep of 1, meaning it's straight, and a width of 8 millimeters. I also learned that the way to hold them while you're actually using it is to hold the handle with your dominant hand and then hold on to the actual metal of the chisel with your other hand. Basically, you want the thumbs kind of facing in opposite directions. Then while you're using it, you're actually pushing your hands in opposition to each other. This helps make the whole thing more stable and stops you from just kind of jutting forward after you get through like a tougher section, right? Okay, so for starters, I really wanted to kind of groove out all of those lines that I had drawn. The chisel I decided to use to do this job was this number 12 here, which is basically like a sharp U shape. I understand you'd usually use one called like a V gouge to do something like this, but my kit actually didn't come with one of those, so I'm gonna have to buy one separately. That being said, this still did a really good job of carving all those lines. I was also able to get through this pine super easily. Really fast aside on wood, I learned that the tighter the grain is, kind of the nicer the carving comes out, the more smooth it comes out. And I can totally see how that's the case while using this yellow pine, because the yellow pine actually has like really big, soft grain. So if I wasn't careful, if I tried to take too big of a bite, a lot more of it wanted to chip away than what I actually wanted to remove. Just something to keep in mind when selecting your wood. I also had a really cool learning experience when it came to going against the grain. So as you can see on the branch that I carved out here, those lines are really messy and choppy looking. So I went online to research how to make that look better, and I got a great explanation from a channel called My Chip Carving. I'll leave a link in the description below. He basically said you can still go quote unquote with the grain, even though you're kind of cutting through the grain. He explained it perfectly using a deck of cards as visualization. So pretend these cards are the grains in the wood. By lining up those cards along with the grain of the wood and positioning the ends to match the shape you're trying to carve out, you can see that it gives you this little slant here. As you can see, one way you can push against the cards easily, and in the opposite direction they fight you. The grain of the wood works the same way. If you go into that direction that would normally be smoother for the cards, you're technically going with the grain. So using that trick, I lay my cards along this line that needs to be cut, and can see which way the cards would move more smoothly. That tells me that I should use my chisel in this direction to get the best outcome. As you can see, it did wonders for my lines, way more smooth. One last thing, if you're using your hands to carve and you find that you're not able to get a lot of like little detail, like you're overshooting your lines a little bit, I recommend switching to using a mallet. This just allows you to make your cuts way more precisely by adding more or less force to your strikes. It was honestly the only way I can get these little animal cutouts to look right. So once I got all my lines carved out how I wanted to, I switched over to this number 5 chisel that has a way less severe arc to it and should help me pare down those edges that I've carved already. I just use it to glide along all those sharp corners I made from gouging out my lines. Doing this gave me a lot of extra dimension, as by just kind of rounding out those corners, it makes the impression that the entire thing is rounded and makes it look a little bit taller than it actually is. And by removing the outside edges around the shapes and then sanding the tool marks away, it just gives the impression that those images are sticking out a lot further from the wood. For finer details like those found on the crow here, I used this angled chisel to just trace the lines all around the wings. I then went back in with my number 5 chisel again and carefully carved out from about 1/4 of an inch away, all the way up to where I made those line cuts. Again, doing this just makes each one of those little extra details and feathers stick out a little bit further and gives the impression of a lot more dimension. This way it doesn't just look like a drawing with lines that you scratched into the wood. It has dimension and body to it. So once I was happy with all of my lines, I went back through with 120 grit sandpaper and just removed all of my tool marks as best as I could. It's hard to see a lot of detail here, but the real magic comes when you stain the thing. Before I did, I just made sure all of the dust and wood chips were removed with a brush. Now for a stain, I'm using this semi-transparent weathered oak made by Minwax. This stuff is kind of cool because the longer you leave it on the surface, the more it actually changes the color. It darkens over time. The final result was this gray-brown look of an old aged oak. Not only that, but all the extra stain soaked into the indents that I carved, helping to make them stand out a little more. Now I do know right now it looks a little monotone and flat. I promise you we're gonna make that look better. Consider this just our undercoat for now. The first way we do that is by taking a block of wood and wrapping some sandpaper around it. Sanding with that, make sure just the high points actually get sanded and adds highlights to the whole thing. If you were using a darker stain, this technique would really help everything pop, and you could probably get away with just doing that. But we're gonna go a lot further here in a second. First though, I wanted to lock that all in place with some polyurethane, just to help protect this underlayer. Now, to add more dimension and not only kind of make it look older, but kind of moody and set a tone, I busted out my airbrush and started outlining all my carvings with a black paint. I also started going around the outside and feathering it in to make a nice vignette. This allowed me to add a bunch of extra detail and really make all of my shapes pop out. Finally, I went more heavy-handed around the outside rim that I had marked earlier to really give it a dark, strong border. Then again, I hit the whole thing with polyurethane to protect it. Now this thing is looking slick! Look at how dope that is! All you crafters out there will know, there's one point in which things start to come together where you just you get so excited. This was that point for me. God, I love how that was coming out. So originally, I wanted to wrap that whole edge in like a leather or a rawhide, but I really liked the way that black border was looking. I didn't want to mess with it too much. So I decided to just add leather to the outer rim of the shield. To do that, I just hit the edge with some contact cement all the way around. I also hit the strap that I cut out of chrome tan leather the same width. Then I just carefully secured it into place all around the edge of the shield. Finally, to make sure it stayed put and put a little extra interest into it, I used some of these tack nails spaced 1.5 inches apart all the way around the shield. And honestly, I think that looks pretty dope. Well, I was in the mood to embellish a little bit. I also went around that outside edge with my compass, marking off every 5 inches. I then went ahead and dropped in some of these upholstery tacks everywhere a mark was made. I love using upholstery tacks for projects like this. For some reason, they just have that cool medieval aggressive kind of feel to them. Alright, so to really make this thing kind of a badass shield, I also wanted there to be a boss in the middle. A boss is just kind of like a metal bowl piece that was used so, one, your hand can kind of fit into it, and two, to kind of add extra protection to your hand. Like if an axe cleaved through the wood, at least it wasn't cleaving into your hand. I'm sure there are other reasons too, but those are the ones off the top of my head. Because I'm lazy and don't have a dishing stump, I just ended up buying this cat food bowl from Petco to use as my boss. In order to be able to actually secure the thing to the shield though, I needed holes all around the outside rim. To make those, I just put this thing on my anvil and used a punch to hammer those holes into place evenly all around the outside. This actually had the added benefit of leaving me with these little tiny spikes of metal sticking out that I figured I can actually just kind of push into the pine once I've set it into place to stop it from moving around at all. Now, if you look at the skill tree logo here, you'll see that diamond in the middle of the tree. I kind of wanted to replicate that feel on that boss. So I just went ahead and used some masking tape to make a little diamond pattern right in the middle. Then I hit the whole thing with a rubbed bronze spray paint. Once that was dried, I positioned it where it would go and used my compass to figure out how large around the circle needed to be. Then, using the center point that I had marked out in the beginning, I was able to mark out exactly where I needed to cut. After that, it was a simple matter of drilling out the middle so that I can use my jigsaw to cut away my hole. Then I just made sure it was sanded smooth so that no hard edges would go where my hand would land. With that cut out, I positioned my boss into place and pushed it down so all those little metal spikes bit into the wood. Then I used those small tacks through the holes that I punched and hammered them into place all around the boss. This gives me this nice protected little spot that my fist fits into, and honestly adds a really badass looking feature in the middle of my shield. And since it is just kind of in place with those tacks, I could pry it off if I wanted to and just change it out for something a little bit cooler or larger if I felt I needed it. Alright, so this thing is looking slick, but as of now, I don't have any way to hold it. It's like a battle frisbee at this point. To help solve that, I just busted out this piece of 1.5 by 1.5 inch poplar and drew this little handhold design on it. Then I brought it over to my bandsaw to cut it out. As you can see, it's just 2 slopes with a thinned out area in the middle, just big enough for my hand to be able to grab onto. That I of course sanded down to make nice and smooth. Then I added a stain to it, as well as to 2 other pieces of poplar, which will act as some bracing on the back of the shield. To make sure it all stays in place, I added a generous amount of wood glue to everything, and then securely nailed it all together. Finally, I wrapped some leather cordage around my handle just for a little extra grip. And check out how dope this shield looks! I am so stoked with how this came out. At first, it was just an excuse for me to use my carving set, but after I got a bit obsessed with how it looked, I really kind of went overboard with it. It is gorgeous and super solid feeling. Oh, I love it so much. Some quick build notes though. Though it's actually pretty lightweight, a more traditional one would be almost like 1/2 inch thinner than this. At least the edges would have tapered out. Doing that would actually make it a lot lighter. But with it being that thin, I'd recommend you also do the more traditional thing and cover it in like a glued linen or maybe like a leather to help add a little bit more reinforcement to it. Which honestly would be cool too, then you're just kind of painting on your design. I think that would look neat. Also, I think eventually what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pound in some long spikes from the front and then bend them over through the back. The handle and the boss I do feel are really strong on there, but I think just kind of bending something over like that would really anchor it into place and make sure you couldn't physically pull it off no matter what. But there you have it. I hope you liked this project half as much as I did and decided to try it yourself. It was so much fun. If you do like what you saw here, make sure you give me some of that like it love and don't forget to subscribe so you know when I release new content. Finally, I just wanted to remind you that we're in the middle of our Level Up LARP competition. Already, a bunch of you have joined and are making some of the most amazing costumes. They're so dope, the stuff you've been working on. If you're into LARP and would like the chance to come with us to the largest LARP in the world in Germany, check out the link in the description below or watch this video here explaining the competition. In the meantime, though, keep leveling up, you. You made it to the end screen, thank you for that. YouTube loves when you do. It, as well as sharing and liking, is a great way to support this channel. Another great way is by joining these people's noble ranks and becoming a patron of the channel through Patreon. Special shout out this week to these high tier level Patreon members: Trey Brunson, Michael Kraus, Robert G, and Everett Vincent. Thank you so much. It means the world to me that you support what we do here and you like us enough to help us out in that way. If you like what we do here and want to support, consider joining our Patreon, link in the description below. Another great way to support us is just by clicking on one of these videos here that YouTube thinks you'd like. I'll drink my salty whiskey until you've decided.